I'd like to also welcome our speakers, Joe Costello, the Irish Foreign Minister, Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever and a member of the Sun Lead Group, Jay Naidoo, who's the chair of the GAIN Board and also a member of the Sun Lead Group, and David Nabarro, who's the coordinator of the Sun Movement and the UN Special Representative on Food Security and Nutrition. And I'd like to also welcome all the participants for joining us here today. We're going to have a few speeches here, and then we'll go to the dinner, which will be next door. But let me just say a few words to start us off. Most of us who have been working in this sector for a long time realize that we are really at a unique moment for the nutrition sector, where finally nutrition is really emerging on the agenda as part of the global priority on food and nutrition security. We all know how important nutrition is and how big the challenge is. And as we heard already today, because we had a session a little bit earlier, is that nutrition, it represents 11% of the global disease burden, and a third of the deaths of children under 5 are attributed to malnutrition. We face a challenge where the world still has 870 million people who are considered hungry and 180 million children who are stunted. We know that malnutrition holds back productivity of individuals, communities, and nations. But we have some really exciting news over the last couple of years with the development of the scale-up nutrition movement. We have hundreds of organizations who've signed on to be part of the SUN process, these civil society, the private sector, the UN, and many governments. And this is under the UN Secretary General. It is overseen by a lead group, a multi-stakeholder set of actors, which is chaired by Tony Lake, the executive director from UNICEF. And it is coordinated by David Nabarro, who we'll hear from shortly. But I think the key thing is at the core of the SUN is the countries. And we have 33 countries who've now signed up, which is a major accomplishment. So as part of the scale-up nutrition movement, there's also a new architecture, which is in the form of networks that bring together key constituencies to actually coordinate and galvanize action and to make sure it's aligned with country plans. Those networks are focusing on donors. There's one for the UN system, there's one for civil society, and there's one for business. And that's where we are, that's why we're here today. Both the World Food Program and GAIN have had a long bilateral partnership, and so we're really pleased to be working together to facilitate the SUN Business Network on behalf of the lead group. Maybe just let me say a couple of things of what we're trying to achieve with the SUN Business Network. Firstly, we are trying to establish a multi-sectoral partnership which has the governments, particularly of high-burden countries, at the core of it. There are other key partners who are involved that are also critical that need to be there. But really the core of this platform, even when we're talking about a business network, is the key governments. We're not trying to create a new structure. We're not trying to create a new body. This is really envisaged as a light touch network that really has its main goal as facilitating and engaging and informing business so that they can play a key role in the scale-up nutrition movement. The SUN Business Network is accountable to the SUN Lead Group, and it needs to be very clear that it sits underneath that structure. Another important characteristic of this is that the SUN Business Network needs to be a transparent and open structure. So this means that the members are going to be asked to provide some statements of interest and of commitment, but members also need to agree on a set of ethical standards, which include the SUN principles of engagement and also includes supporting the code on the marketing of breast milk substitutes. So before turning over to our speakers, I just wanted to recognize and thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Government of the Netherlands, which has supported this meeting and provided some resources to get the Sun Business Network going. So thank you for that. But with no further ado, let me turn to our first speaker, Paul Polman from Unilever. Thank you.
I'm very glad to actually, as Marc has asked to do, officially, if you want to launch what you're doing tomorrow here on the Scaling Up Nutrition Business Network, because it's absolutely important. I've come to believe more than anybody else that for many of the challenges that we have today, if business does not get actively involved, we won't have a solution. Too many businesses, as I've said many times, are simply bystanders to a system that gives them life in the first place, and it's very hard to understand when we have so many challenges. So if we can get this force of business involved in this post-2015 development goal panel of 27 members, there are only 2 members from business, and a lot of them were asking, why are you there from business? But you know, 9 out of 10 people in the world in one capacity or another actually works for business. And if you really want to get these sustainable solutions, you have to make that integral part of business models. So it seems so logical to me, but it's hard work to get everybody involved. And I'm very pleased to see that you've given response to this rallying cry and that you've all decided to be here. And it's actually very key that we do that with transformational partnerships, as we call it, with everybody involved. I don't want a meeting anymore with business alone. It would be great to have meetings with all stakeholders there and trying to all focus on these right outcomes, and you'll get farther. It's actually, Jay was there and we were talking about South Africa, and it's actually an old African proverb that says if you want to go fast, you have to go alone, but if you want to go far, you have to go together. And I think in this case there's no doubt about the fact that we want to go far. And that is obviously what you're going to talk tomorrow. Unilever, the company I represent, anytime you need to go back to the history of these companies, why we are there in the first place. But we are there in the first place to improve society, be it the hygiene in Victorian Britain or be it the problems of malnutrition. In fact, the poverty was so high at the end of last century that 2 of our Dutch forefather companies, Van den Berg Jurgens, for the Dutch people here, they were actually asked by the government to find a cheaper and healthier alternative to butter. And that was actually the origins of margarine. We shouldn't forget that. And even today, obviously, wherever we are, we reinforce these products. And it's simply the right thing to do. And that would be the same with our savory products or other things. So what we're talking here about today is quite normal to us, especially you know, being a company that deals with 2 billion people a day using our products. It is more than just providing the functionality. If you can reach, like we do in many parts of the world, more people than governments can or anybody else, it also brings with that a responsibility that just goes more than the basic benefits or what I call the short-term buck. And increasingly the consumer is expecting that of you. There's something wonderful happening in this society with digitization. It's 2.5 billion people. 2.5 billion people is 1 out of 3. Just think about that. Is actually connected via the internet. 1.5 billion people are on social sites. I always say Facebook is the 3rd country in the world after China and India. They just passed 1 billion people. And these consumers increasingly are demanding it. You see it every day in the paper. This weekend, last weekend, if there's a fire in Bangladesh, the first thing they want to know is which were the companies. If there's a country that has a deficit, they first want to know who's paying tax. If there's a problem to be dealt with poverty, undoubtedly they want to know which companies are socially responsible. So I keep saying, and this has to be understood with no less or no more words, that companies that don't understand that they have to be part of the solution are going to be dinosaurs in the not too distant future. And it's actually happening around us. The companies cannot once more be mere bystanders to the system that gives them life in the first place. And you have to find ways to internalize in your businesses some of these bigger global challenges, how daunting they may be. But in your own modest way, small or big companies, you have to start making contributions. You know, it is absolutely... I was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was in the Dharavi slum in Mumbai. I don't know if any of you have been there, but there's over a million people actually living there on 1.7 square miles. And that's about the size of 2 square meters. That's less than a double bed that these people live in. And I wanted to see that because it's in a community in itself, and to some extent brings home again how fortunate we are the way in the parts of the world that we've been born with the tools that we've been given, to be honest. But there you see the importance of nutrition like anywhere else. It's not just about calories or food, it's about nutritional value to give these people a chance. And it drove that home again, how important that is for their own dignity and their plight to succeed. So when we talk about a world that isn't functioning quite, that's the world we live in right now, where 1 billion people go to bed hungry, where every 6 seconds still a child dies of hunger. It's just hard to believe that we accept that as a world that we want to live in. And then you hear Marc talk about 170 million children stunted under the age of 5, and business ought to be actively involved in that. And often I hear, I don't know if you do, well, that's a problem of the emerging markets, and we will solve it over time with globalization and with economic growth. But if that is the case, with the enormous growth and wealth creation we've had, how come we're at this point where we are right now? And it's very clear that what that tells you is that the model of growth, which after all has lifted over 500 million people out of poverty, the globalization, but it's also fair to say it is a system that has only functioned with over-consumerism and with leaving too many people behind. And in any system where too many people feel that they're not participating or are left behind, these people will ultimately rebel against the system. You would do the same. That's at the roots of the Occupy Wall Streets or the Arab Springs and many other things. And we've just seen the beginning of it, to be honest. And people think it's an emerging market problem that we're talking here. If that is what you're discussing tomorrow, it's actually not the case. I was 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago in the food bank in Washington. We were doing a program with them. All the regional food banks, this one was telling me that 1 in 5 children in Washington area is undernourished. Most of them not getting any meals anymore at home. They have to rely fully on their schools to be fed. And the issue of nutrition is creeping in there. 46 million people in America live off food stamps, which I didn't realize, I should have, but I learn every day as well, is that it basically only lasts till the middle of the month. And then they're scraping with whatever fills their stomach, up to the point of sniffing glue. We met some people to make it till the end of the month. In Europe, which is the part of the world that we are right now, about 25% of the population is again slipping into poverty. And while some governments don't want to have it on their agenda, even here in the UK or many other countries, the issue of nutrition is becoming very prevalent. And the challenge, and that's why I have a lot of respect and energy for scaling up nutrition, is the global governance is difficult. You see that on the G20s, or you see it on the G8s, you see it on the climate change, you see it on the Doha rounds. We've moved to a very interdependent and complex world in all dimensions. And unfortunately, our institutions and governmental systems haven't adapted. And that's why it's so important that movements like this get their energy and their responsibility to move things forward. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen anymore, at least not in the foreseeable future. It's not good or bad, it's just a reality. And that's why I started with my little joke about Brussels, but it's actually more than a joke. And we cannot sit there and be critical about it. We have to take that responsibility to move things forward. So the Sin movement has certainly, its time has come to break some of these molds of addressing some of these issues in a conventional way. That's why I was very pleased to see the Zero Hunger rallying cry of the Secretary General, and then again nutrition firmly into this. But as I said, business now needs to become more of a trailblazer and not to trail behind. And that's why my rallying cry to you is, see in each of your business models what you can do, combined with the people that are just already in this audience. We reach the billions of people. And yes, we often actually reach people that are on the bottom of the pyramid as well. And if we can just look at that in responsible business models, whatever it is, be it the basic nutrition we can provide, the improved diets we can give, health training that comes with it. Whatever the contribution is that you want to do and build into your business model will have a multiplying effect. As Marc was saying, and it's not surprising, business people like a good return on their investment. Unfortunately, in this world, we've only looked at the return on capital investment. We've not looked at the return on social investment or the return on natural capital investment. If we would do that also, business people would be the best ones to optimize that return. And the moment we can optimize the economic, the natural capital, and the social capital returns, this world is flying. So here is an opportunity to broaden this dimension. And the case is enormously exciting for business people who like to have a high return. In fact, if you spend $1 combating hunger in this case, it actually can unlock $30 in terms of savings in reducing public health costs or increasing the economic productivity. I don't know of few other investments that frankly have such a high return. And obviously, the one thing that we have to understand, which you know again, is that just the improving nutrition by itself has an enormous positive effect on the economic growth and development of a country, but the reverse is not always true. We have some countries like Indonesia or India, if I may name a few, that are more or less food independent, but they don't have the right nutritional levels. And just on the economic growth itself, people think, and I think that number is not far off, that we're losing about 2 to 3% of the economic growth because we're not addressing this simple issue. That frankly is one of the easiest challenges to address if we decide to do this, as is the challenge of the 1 billion people going to bed as well. You know, it only takes 1% more food to not have these billion people go to bed hungry. And yet we're capable of wasting 30% of food in the food supply, and we're capable of sending another billion plus people into obesity, with diabetes too now being one of the biggest epidemics, but that's for another thing, for another time. So it is about providing the right nutrients. It is about working together. I'm very excited about David having the 33 countries already signed up by its latest count. I was very pleased to lead the task force on the B20 for food security, and we were doing this in France and we were doing this in Los Cabos with Calderon and the last one in Mexico. We're fighting very hard to have food security and nutrition again around the G8 here in the UK and the G20 in Russia. But it's not so easy because a lot of the politicians have become very short term. And they don't see the correlation as well as we do behind growth and job creation and the importance of nutrition or sustainable growth. And I think we as business people more than ever have to be sure that we keep it very high on the agenda. But at the Global Food Security Task Force that we had for the B20, we had 15 companies that actually signed up, all very energetically in the Grow Africa initiatives, the new vision for agriculture. And I was very glad to see that we were also able to put nutrition more and more at the heart of some of these issues that we were trying to solve here. So that gives me encouragement. But the reality is also there's much more to be done, obviously, and that's why you're here, providing hopefully affordable products, nutritional products with your companies, enabling this access to local markets that other people cannot get to, investing in some of the research that you're doing and sharing that with others, your scientific and technical innovations for which you're all known, and then some of the knowledge you have in changing consumer behavior. And many of you are consumer goods companies and know how to get that across to mothers, and because it often is mothers or children in school programs, etc. Now I'm very encouraged. I was talking to Indra on the weekend from Pepsi for different reasons, and they have a wonderful she was telling me a wonderful iron deficiency reduction program in India itself, major contributor obviously to anemia that you're well familiar with, and believe it or not, more than half of the population there is affected. So enough food but not the right nutrition, as we talked about. And then you all know Vanista with her Britannia nutrition. We had the Scaling Up Nutrition event at Downing Street, and she just made the statement that it was quite normal that all her the cookies that she sells and all these that was so normal for her to have them all reinforced. And then I got interested in what she was doing, and they have a Britannia Nutrition Foundation where again I found that they have enormous health education programs And then they include basic hygiene and sanitation in that in India that show tremendous impact. They have actually the hard data to see that. And then my friend Feike from DSM in the Netherlands, as a Dutchman, obviously we like to have Dutch friends as well. And he, DSM has always been one of the first ones involved, as Martin knows, in the World Food Program, and seriously contributing without really asking themselves first, what's in it for me? And they very well understand the benefits. And obviously their Nutri-Rice and their reinforcement that they're looking at and versus the ordinary rice is enormous. And I think the partnership that they have with the World Food Program in places like Bangladesh or Cambodia or some other places, and I cannot mention them all, Vietnam, that is probably one of the good examples of how it should be done. So I could go on and tell you here about 100 other stories of companies that have done tremendous work to make their contributions. I deliberately focus on some of the great companies, and some of you are represented here. But wouldn't it be great if we get just a critical mass a little bit more? Wouldn't it be great if the food company, who represents, frankly, all citizens of this world, if we at least can get 100, 150 of these companies, including the retailers, by the way, actively involved in this, we truly can change this. We truly can get to the vision of the Secretary General, we truly can get to the vision of David, get to the vision of Marc, and many others. Not only zero hunger, but eradicating the whole issue of nutritional shortness, if you want to. So I think that's the new tomorrow we should all be striving for. That's the new tomorrow that we should also be sure we build in the post-2015 development goals. A new tomorrow, frankly, where children can grow up well-nourished. A new tomorrow where children can learn the way we had the opportunities to learn, stay healthy the way we stay healthy, and where each in turn obviously can make a contribution to society and have a positive outlook for them and for many others to come. So I'm here because I feel passionately about you putting so much energy behind that. David, unwavering energy. Anytime I send David an email, where's David anyway? Where are you sitting, man? He's too shy. Why don't you stand up and get an applause? I know you don't want it. I'm known for answering my emails very quickly, but I have to say I have a role model in David. Anytime I send him a question, I get 2 pages back of what I should be doing. So I feel like I partly work for him. But you know, it's through the efforts of Gain, of Marc, of David, of the World Food Program, and many others. The 33 countries now, the heroic heads of state. We got Odinga to sign up at the event during the Olympics. People that are really now committed. It's becoming critical mass, and it's more than critical mass. And if we can now prove that this can be solved, we've really done the world a bigger favor than you think. But it requires you as companies, and I'm so pleased again once more that you've taken that responsibility, and I certainly look forward to many of these projects with you. If we as a company can share the ideas, the bottlenecks, some of the challenges that we've had, because any mountain you climb is not a smooth one. You have to have some little bumps. Sometimes you have to go down a little bit to acclimatize before you go up again, and it's the same here. So if we can draw from each other's learnings and wisdoms, we could go even faster. But be that passionate advocate into your companies. If your CEO isn't here and you feel there are some bottlenecks, don't hesitate to call me. I'd be happy to be part of that solution as well. And together we'll get there. And I think we owe that. We owe that to these people who actually should be standing here, but for reasons of being stunted or for reasons of being too hungry to talk, they're not here to represent themselves. And that's why we are here. So thanks for your time.
Thank you for those comments. And I think we should make sure that tomorrow during the sessions we really try and take up the call. How do we get business to be a trailblazer, and certainly the way Unilever has, and how do we crowd more business into this agenda? Let me turn now to David Nabarro to speak. David.
This room is just full of the best people, and it's difficult to identify individuals and point out why they're so important. But I would like just to start by acknowledging Paul Polman to you I can't quite do it in the same way that he did it to me, but I instead just will tell you that once I was stranded in Western Switzerland, and Paul was there, and he gave me a lift in his car, and we spent 6 hours together through a most extraordinary snowstorm when cars were sliding all over the place. I didn't notice much of that. I just had such a lot that I learnt. And I learnt mostly that one of the things that really drives Paul, besides running marathons, is a trust that he is involved in, the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust, which for him is one of his most extraordinary contributions. And I think that it was hearing him talk about the work that he has done with blind people in East Africa made me understand what a great human being he is. And it's a privilege, Paul, that you are taking the cause of nutrition so seriously as a person, through your company, through your work with major groups like the World Economic Forum, for your work with the B20, for your work in the Secretary General's High-Level Expert Panel, for your work on transformative partnerships for the Global Compact, for your work with Conservation International, and numerous other things that you have done, do, and will continue to do. I'd like to clap you. I hope you won't mind. I'd also like to acknowledge some very important people who are here. They're sitting in the back. Wilbald Laurie, are you here? Could you stand up? This is Dr. Wilbald Laurie, representing President Kikwete of Tanzania, member of the Sun Lead Group. Wilbald, thank you for being here. I hope also Terry Wafwafwa, you won't mind. Are you sitting there? Do you mind standing up? Terry Wafwafwa, who is the Scale-Up Nutrition Focal Point from Kenya, and Kenya's work on Sun has been extraordinary. We're hoping also that Edith and Tete from Ghana, Chris Okapunwi from Nigeria, and colleagues from Bangladesh will be here. Maybe they're in the room now. If they are, great. Yeah, where? Hey! Thank you for dressing in such an incredibly unnoticeable way. That's really lovely to see you here. I hope that the journey was okay. I was very sorry to hear of some other news from Nigeria this morning, which is a great cause of concern to me. I think I'd like to just say to all of you that we have members of the Scale Up Nutrition Movement Lead Group in the room. We have members representing governments that are involved in supporting Scale Up Nutrition. But perhaps I'd really like to pick on Joe Costello, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Ireland. Do you know that the contribution of the people of Ireland to the effort, the global effort on reducing hunger and improving nutrition per head of population, in my judgment, is greater than any other country in the world? And it is stunning, the consistency with which Ireland is supporting this effort. We'll get a chance to applaud you, Joe, when you speak. But what a man you are, and thank you for the leadership of the government and people of Ireland. Thank you, Tom Arnold, also representing the people of Ireland through your work chairing the Constitutional Commission. It's really great that you're here with us as well. Ireland is strongly represented in the movement. So the movement is a collective effort. It brings together governments, hundreds of organizations, thousands of individuals who simply want to end hunger and undernutrition in all its forms. It's self-organizing. It's not an organization in its own right. It's a group of people who've decided to organize themselves. It's not an institution. It's not a fund. It's not a program. But it is a collection of people who are working together for one set of outcomes. And at its heart are 33 countries that in the last 2 years have come together to support the effort. They are home to almost 60 million undernourished children, 1/3 of the global total. And it is the countries, their governments, their people, their institutions, that are at the centre of the movement to scale up nutrition. And that is so important and so central to all we're doing, because it means the rest of us, whether we're in the United Nations or in international civil society or in business or in research or part of the donor community, we are committed to doing one thing only, and that is to support the countries as they take forward their efforts to achieve their targets. We're supporting countries as they establish multi-stakeholder platforms for action on nutrition, putting in place the necessary policy and legal frameworks and aligning frameworks around aligning stakeholders around common frameworks to get all of development sensitive to nutrition and to get the kind of outcomes that we all want. We're supporting them as they mobilize more resources and as they demonstrate their results. There are people in this room who have shown how agriculture can be made more sensitive to nutrition, particularly Gordon Conway, who's sitting in front of me and who'll be with us tomorrow. Thank you for your leadership on bringing together the different agricultural actors so that they will contribute to nutritional outcomes. Now, sometimes we refer to the bottom of the pyramid as being the people who we most concentrate on. As we look at the Sun movement, we see that actually the people who are at the centre of our work are actually some of the poorest people in the world, who are in a way also the most efficient and the most resilient in what they're able to do with very, very limited resources at their disposal. Sometimes I think we should refer to them as being at the top of the pyramid because they're so extraordinarily efficient and effective and trying to do amazing things in terms of organising their children's well-being and their own well-being despite living under extremely difficult circumstances. And the Sun movement is working for the hundreds of millions of people who are at risk of undernutrition. What we're already seeing is that 12 countries within the movement are reducing their rate of chronic undernutrition at more than 2% a year, which is moving towards the World Health Organization's recommended target for reduction in undernutrition of just over 3.5%. This is already a very positive sign. 12 countries are moving, and we will see more and more countries demonstrating this progress as they organise their efforts around targets for improving nutrition. The movement's being helped because internationally it's gaining a higher profile. There was the Olympic Hunger event in August this year, organised by Britain and Brazil, which showed how much high-level support there is for action to lead to better nutrition outcomes, and perhaps paved the way for what we're going to see in June 2013, what's called the pre-G8 meeting on hunger, food and nutrition, being organised by the UK government together with others within the G8 framework. But there are other events coming up in 2013, particularly during the Irish presidency of the European Union, also events to do with the post-2015 agenda organised by Spain and Colombia, and events to do with nutrition outcomes organised by the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization with a big international conference in November. Take these events together, and 2013 will be the year that nutrition came to life. Think of those words, the year that nutrition came to life. And I believe that we're going to see nutrition being transformed as an issue as a result of the efforts of the Sun countries and of all these different global efforts. Today is an example of how groups within the Sun movement, development partners, civil society, business, and the United Nations system are organising themselves to take responsibility. It's the launch of the Sun Business Network and the creation of its system of governance. You've heard already from others about the business case for investing in nutrition. You've heard why businesses want to participate in this great effort to improve nutrition. So let's think for a minute or two about why the movement needs business. And I feel that's my job, is to reach out to you and say, we need you in the centre of the movement, because Good nutrition is determined by diet, by health, and by the time and autonomy available, particularly to women, caring for themselves and caring for their children. And business can help ensure that people can access the right diet, can sustain good health, and also that women can have time and autonomy, whether it is for breastfeeding or for providing complementary foods to their children or ensuring that they're adequately fed during pregnancy. It is quite unreasonable for there to be a continued perception that somehow business is working against the interests of good nutrition, that somehow business is working against women being able to breastfeed their children properly, that business is working against complementary feeding in the early years of life. That, however, is a perception among certain groups, and I would like the Sun Business Network to set itself right from the start the goal of showing the world that business is absolutely not in that space that it's sometimes identified as being at, but instead is totally committed to empowered women being able to enjoy good nutrition during pregnancy, to have full opportunities to breastfeed their children, to have the opportunities to provide complementary source foods to their children, and to be in a position to ensure good nutritional outcomes through accessing clean water, sanitation, and having time and autonomy to do this. And that means in some cases perhaps finding ways for women business people to be able to be supported by your companies so that they can be role models for others and show that business is pro-women and pro-nutrition at all phases of life. Let's try to make sure that every single business everywhere is committed not just to inclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life, but continued breastfeeding along with appropriate complementary feeds for up to 2 years and beyond. Let's see it spelt out in every single piece of appropriate publicity that you're involved in, that this is where you stand, and you're not into anything else except for these outcomes, so that nobody can possibly question your motives. And do make yourselves open to audit at all times, so that these issues can be made clear, so that we can move away from what I consider to be the dark age in which nutrition companies, food companies, companies interested in nutrition have sometimes felt that they can't come into this space because it gives them a serious reputational risk. And do continue to work on water supply, hygiene and sanitation, because dirty drinking water, open defecation, chronic diarrhea contribute to undernutrition in children. This is part of the agenda, and many of your companies can work in this area. The Unilever, Lifebuoy and Domestos campaigns are very good examples of this. If you're into IT, if you're into communication, if you're into any part of marketing, you can use communications tools to be able to improve nutrition. For example, the rapid SMS system being used in Malawi, providing an instant feedback loop that health workers and governments can use. Let's make certain that all companies and all businesses and all their processes are part of this movement. Help us to develop principles of engagement within the movement that enable all to participate together with mutual respect and accountability. Help us to find ways to make sure that conflicts of interest don't occur, or if they do occur, that we can deal with them immediately. And help us to make certain that your ABC strategy that's been circulated today can be brought to life, and that business can play the role that it must play in better nutritional outcomes and empowered societies, and people being able to enjoy their right to food and nutrition, which is what I know you all stand for. I salute you all. Thank you very much for coming together today. Thank you for launching the Business Network. Thank you for this evening.
I'd like to just thank David. I think his passion and hard work have really what has been behind bringing the Sun movement to life over the last few years. Let me turn now to Minister Costello to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc. And I think your description of David is quite accurate. It's his passion that comes through, and that's extremely important. It's the humanity of the man and his commitment to the scaling up nutrition that is there. I was listening to Paul there earlier talking about economists, and I have a joke about economists too. As to say, the dismal science of economics. But if all the economists in the world were laid end to end, they wouldn't make a conclusion. Or neither would they reach one. I'm delighted to be here at the launch of the business network. I think it's extremely important, the Sun Business Network. We were present, Ireland was present at the establishment of the initial launch in the United Nations, September 2010, with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And the reason that we have been at the core of this issue for quite a long time is because of our own legacy, our own experience of famine in the 19th century, and that has always remained with us. The fact that 1 million Irish people died in the middle of the 19th century when there was more than enough food in the country to feed the population. Another 1 million left the country, immigrated. So we see hunger as a very key area, and nutrition as part of that. And in the context of the Irish programme, the Irish Aid programme, it has always been at the heart of it, and it is the single area where most of our funding goes to, is what we call the hunger agenda, dealing with it. And it really is quite simple in the way that we see it, and that is that what we are about is dealing with the poorest people in the world, the people who have least in the world, and that the first thing that is required is the right to live. And the only way to live is with food. And the only way to have a proper living is to have enough nutrition so that you can have a healthy mind and a healthy body. And therefore, the core of our approach to dealing with our overseas development and all the rest of it is very much hunger, poverty and nutrition. And that is what we have been doing with GAIN, with the World Food Programme, in sub-Saharan Africa, where we have our partnership countries, Mozambique, and also in Vietnam, which is another one of our 9 partners countries, 7 in sub-Saharan Africa and 1 in Vietnam and the other in Timor-Leste. And we are bringing that as well to the Irish presidency, which begins on the 1st of January. We already have talked with the commissioners, we've spoken with a lot of bodies in relation to it, a lot of countries that are represented here, the ministries for development and so on. So that at the heart of our presidency will be the nutrition and the hunger and the eradication of poverty issues, and very much the scaling up nutrition. And we want to bring that a step further then to the other part of what we're going to be focusing on during our presidency, and that is the advancement of the Millennium Development Goals. 2015, they come to an end. There's a review mechanism beginning in the United Nations in September 2015. And we are very anxious that, first of all, we can work towards a framework that will incorporate and integrate as best as possible we can the Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals, so that we move forward with a single stranded approach rather than a multiplicity of approaches for the European Union, and then tic-tac in other areas as well. But that at the heart of that, a priority issue has to be the scaling up nutrition, that we have to ensure that mothers and children are treated properly so that they are able to live in the first instance, and that they're able to become healthy and useful citizens in society, as well, of course, as the quality of their own lives. So that is the direction that we will be going in very much. And it cannot be done by countries alone, it cannot be done by programs alone, it cannot be done by NGOs alone. It can only be done in a successful fashion, in much the same way as the approach to HIV was done. It was a total lost cause until the private companies became involved and generic drugs became involved. So the private sector, to my mind, is absolutely key to a successful approach to the scaling up nutrition agenda. And that's why in my own portfolio of trade and development, while we don't have the two tied into the other, nevertheless, there's no doubt about it that it is the private sector that will be able to make such an enormous contribution to the Sun agenda. So I'll talk about this in greater detail tomorrow, but can I say that from our point of view, it's delighted to see what is happening here today, to see that the business network has been established, and I have great hopes for it in relation to the work that has been proposed for the Scaling Up Nutrition agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I think we're really excited about next year, particularly with the Irish presidency coming. Let me turn to our last speaker, to Jay Naidoo.
Good evening. Good evening. I know I stand between you and a very hot, nutritious, delicious meal. So don't hold it against me. I think David, Paul, and Minister Costello have been very eloquent in painting a picture of what we enter into as a discussion tomorrow. But maybe just a few comments from me. I think, Paul, a great challenge that faces us, and we could start on this tomorrow, is how to go far and go fast at the same time. And I think that's our challenge, because if I look at my own experience of being a trade union organizer in the 70s and 80s in South Africa, and that becoming a backbone of resistance to apartheid, and then creating a situation where this extraordinary political miracle emerged, where we had leaders such as Mandela sitting down with de Klerk and solving a challenge, an intractable challenge that was almost pushing us over the precipice into a racial conflagration. I think back on that and think of us as trade unionists and employers sitting down in really hostile conditions in which battles spilled onto the streets, and still finding a shared interest between ourselves to find the solution and to work together. And that was very much the precursor to those political negotiations that Mandela led with de Klerk that created the political miracle we all came to know. And so today, when I think back and I think, if someone said to me, I should not talk to business, I don't know whether we would have had a trade union movement, because the lifeblood of trade unionism is actually negotiations with business. And I think today, to the same question, is that what is the role of business? And I think there's an extraordinary role that business can play. And I really wish, having been in government as well as a minister under Mandela, that governments would also operate like public companies. If you produce bad products, it's reflected in your share price almost immediately. In politics, we have to wait 5 years before we change the government. So I think there's something that we can learn from each other about how to reach a happy medium. But I think this is important because it really talks to the issue of who is the elephant in the room. And for us coming from the developing world, our governments are that elephant. I'm just coming from India. We had a GAIN board meeting, an extraordinary visit to projects of ours. But then I spent a few days sitting with the Dalits. These are what were regarded as the untouchables in the time of Mahatma Gandhi. And they're not a small community. If you put the Dalit communities and the tribal communities and the religious minorities together, they're 300 million people. Where does the problem of malnutrition sit? It sits in a malnutrition belt where the bulk of the problem sits in these communities that are marginalized and that live in the hardship of poverty. and we can almost pinpoint where these communities are. What does it take for us to stop that scenario where one child every 6 seconds dies of causes that are eminently preventable? What is the political will that is required that will get us to do something decisive about this? Because we have the business models, we have the science, we have the technology, and we know the return on investment is of the ratios that Paul has spoken already about. And so I think that if I go back to those communities, and I spent 2 days with 1,500 activists from villages, and there was an extraordinary feeling that I got from them, because they are the people that will create the movement we want. The movement is not going to come from here. The movement of what we can do here can create the tools, create the business models, create the commitment that we have. But ultimately, it has to be about ownership. And what is extraordinary about that is part of the work that Gain had done with them of saying, how can we support these movements on the ground, give them the aerial cover? And what they did in these Dalit communities across the north of India in particular is visit 200,000 households and find out from the people who are most affected, what is it you want? And they came up with this declaration on what they saw as the declaration of how they saw the challenge of malnutrition. And so what we need to do, and the Sun creates a safe space for us to do, is find the way in which we can connect what comes from the top and what comes from the bottom. And how does that empower communities to demand what is their fundamental human rights? And I think that, if I go back to a saying of Mahatma Gandhi, it's an extraordinary saying, which says, to people who are living in hunger, bread is God. And I think if we just go back to that and start to see how do we create these societies where there is trust restored, where there is the partnership restored, that we recognize that there is no one single stakeholder that is going to solve this huge challenge and burden of hunger, of malnutrition, of underdevelopment. And that ultimately we are all connected within one ecosystem. That you cannot have islands of prosperity in a sea of poverty. And I think that's the goal of Sun, of building that extraordinary partnership that says, I cannot solve it on my own, but I can solve it if we work together. And I need to put aside my preconceptions, my prejudices, my feelings of invincibility in terms of finding solutions, and see how I can work together. And that's what this is part of a process. An important part of this process is connecting to those people, like those Dalits living in villages most affected by the challenges of poverty and hunger. So I look forward to the discussion. David, as usual, you have asked me to
I'm going to
stand next to me. Yeah. And I think with David at my side, nothing is impossible to achieve.
I want you to say it.
And David said, and David reminds me that obviously this is the work that goes beyond this extraordinary effort of bringing very important people like ourselves and very busy people to a place like this to sit in a room and listen to speeches and participate in finding solutions. We must thank the World Food Programme and thank the GAIN team.
Could we just give them a hand, please?
Well, thank you for those inspiring words, Jay. I think now we can move to the next room and have our dinner, and we have a nutritious meal planned for you. So please come.